She hadn't been able to get into the beautician yet.
So,
Judy in a baseball cap still looks better than me.
hello, everybody. Good morning. So do we have
Good
everybody
morning.
on? Let's see. Commissioner Matthews, Ms. Cooper, Ms. Goode, Ms. Wanchek, Mr. Bowker, and Mr. Anderson. So it looks like we have everybody. So good morning. We are on the record in case number 2017-00453, electronic application of Columbia Gas of Kentucky, Inc. to extend its gas cost adjustment performance-based rate mechanism. My name is Robert Cicero. I'm Vice Chairman of the Public Service Commission. With me by video conference is Commissioner Dr. Talina Matthews, and the Chairman will be joining us sporadically and also will participate in this case in making a decision. At this time, I would normally caution attendees to please set your cell phones to silent mode or turn them off. Due to the current state of emergency in Kentucky, the Commission is hosting this hearing via video conferencing. Since this continues to be a learning experience for everyone, there are a few suggestions I would offer. In addition to the normal courtesies regarding cell phones, these tips may help clarity and avoid feedback issues for the video conference hearing. Mute your microphone if you're not speaking. Attorneys, when interjecting, please state your name so the video record is clear. If you use a phone for the audio and a computer for the video, turn off the computer audio, otherwise there will be feedback. If you are in a room with several people with their own computers, turn off the computer audio for all but one computer. Otherwise, there will be feedback. We are learning. If another participant is in the nearby office, close the doors between the office. Sound carries further than one thinks, which can cause feedback. Once in the GoToMeeting software platform, go to your settings. The icon looks like a gear. To ensure the microphone setting is on the microphone you are using, there is a pull-down menu feature in GoToMeeting settings that will list the available microphones. Use wired headphones or wired earbuds for better sound quality. Wired is preferred because wireless devices may lose power depending upon the length of the hearing. Keep a charger nearby in case your battery runs low, and please alert the Commission if you are experiencing technology failure that prevents your participation at any time during the proceedings. Attorneys should contact staff at the previously provided cell phone number. The hearing today is for the purpose of taking evidence on Columbia, Kentucky's motion for reconsideration and rehearing of the Commission's final order issued on October 22nd, 2019. So at this time, we'll have entry of appearance of counsel, and given the unique challenges of conducting a video hearing, I will also request that each party's counsel also identify their witnesses at this time. So for the applicant.
Good morning. This is Brooke Wanchek on behalf of Columbia Gas of Kentucky. Address is 240 West Nationwide Boulevard, Columbus, Ohio, 43215. And today, as witnesses, we have Mr. Mike Anderson and Ms. Judy Cooper.
Thank you. And for staff?
Jeb Penny with the Office of General Counsel.
And? Angela,
Angela,
you're
you have to
on mute.
unmute.
Yeah, you're on mute, Angela.
I apologize. Angela Goode with the Office of General Counsel.
Thank you. Do you have any witnesses?
No witnesses.
Thank you. So I've been advised that public notice has been given and filed into the record. Is that correct? Ms. Wanchek?
Your Honor, we have filed public notice. The request for the publication was filed on May 6th of 2020, and we are awaiting the tear sheets from the newspapers for the actual proof of publication, which we will file as soon as that is available to us.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other motions? I know there's a couple of confidentiality motions that will be ruled on, but at this time I don't think that should be an issue. Public comment. Should anyone from the public like to provide the Commission with public comment, instructions to call in are located on our website, psc.ky.gov. The phone lines will remain open for several minutes at the start of the hearing and close if there are no callers or after everyone has had an opportunity to speak. Should you call in, Please state your name and address for the record before making your statement, and please keep your comments to 5 minutes or less. If there is more than one caller, please be respectful and allow one person to make a statement at a time. It should be noted that comments may always be submitted to the PSC website at psc.ky.gov. So do we know if we have anybody that decided to call in?
Hold on here, let me
Okay,
continue, Your Honor, and I'll be right back.
okay. We're going to check here, and once he completes that, then we'll permit Ms. Wanchek to call her first witness. And that should take just a couple of minutes here to check this.
Avaya, please. The conference is now starting. You are the first person to arrive. You will now be placed into the conference.
This is Jeb Penny with the Public Service Commission. Is there anybody online?
No, okay. So we can move forward. Ms. Wanchek, you may call your first witness.
Thank you. Mr. Mike Anderson will be our first witness.
Okay, I'm going to swear
Good
you
morning,
in.
Ms.
Go ahead, go ahead. No, go ahead, Ms. Wanchek.
It's all you.
Okay. Mr. Anderson, will you raise your right hand, please? Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give is true and correct under penalty of perjury?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. Ms. Wanchek, you can proceed.
Thank you. Mr. Anderson, can you please state your name and title for the record?
Yes, my name is Michael D. Anderson. I'm Director of Supply Development in the NiSource Corporate Services Company, providing services to Columbia Gas of Kentucky and other affiliates of Columbia Gas of Kentucky.
And did you cause testimony to be filed on your behalf on January 3rd, 2020 in this matter?
Yes, I did.
Have you had an opportunity to review that testimony?
Yes, I have.
Do you have any changes to your testimony?
No, I do not.
If today I were to ask you the same questions contained in your testimony, would your answers be the same?
Yes, they would.
Mr. Vice Chairman, the witness is available for cross-examination.
Thank you. Ms. Goad, would you like to ask?
I would. Good morning, Mr. Anderson.
Good morning.
In your pre-filed testimony, you discussed 3 components of Columbia's performance-based rate mechanism. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And the first component that you discussed is a monthly gas cost incentive, or a GCI. Can you explain what this component entails?
Yes, the gas cost incentive component, simply stated, provides the company an incentive to manage its gas purchases in a least cost manner below a specified index. Those indexes relate to monthly costs of gas, daily costs of gas, and then a weekly cost of gas.
Okay, and then if there are savings, as you were alluding to, that are generated by Columbia, how is that shared between Columbia and the customers?
There's a mechanism in the current prior approved mechanism that brings all 3 components together in a monthly calculation. There is a 2% threshold that needs to be met. Once that threshold is met, then the sharing is 50-50 between the company and the customers.
And would it be accurate to state that if the monthly savings are between 0 and 2%, then it's shared 70% for customers and 30% for the company?
I believe that's correct. Yeah, the first 2% is shared 30-70, and the but that's of the total of all 3 components, not of the individual components.
Right. And then the savings over 2% is shared 50-50 between the customers and the company.
Yes, ma'am.
correct? Okay, and the second component that you discussed in your testimony is the off-system sales incentive mechanism, or the OSSI. Can you please explain your understanding of that component?
Yes, the off-system sales component typically is comprised of two primary categories. One is sales of gas, or the off-system sales component. That piece can be, for example, if we're able to purchase gas at one location and resell it at another location and make a profit on that, then we can do that. The other component is called an exchange, and that exchange can be either would be a part or a loan, and those are usually time valued exchanges. So, for example, as you go into the winter and you start withdrawing gas from storage, you have a space available in storage that would otherwise not be used to serve the customer's needs. If there's an opportunity on an economic basis to, and complying with the pipeline tariffs, to park gas in, say, November and then give it back to the counterparty in January, and there's a time value of that exchange, then we would enter into an exchange like that and provide that revenue piece, the margin piece would then go into the sharing mechanism.
Okay, and is it accurate to state that the net revenues generated by Columbia from these off-system sales are shared under that same two-tiered structure that we already discussed?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and then the third component is the transportation cost index. Can you explain what this component entails?
Yes, this provides the company an incentive to reduce demand cost from pipelines. The basis of that calculation is the just and appropriate rates as established by FERC in FERC-centered proceedings of the pipeline. To the extent then that we're able to negotiate rates less than those FERC-approved rates, the difference between the negotiated rate and the FERC-approved rate goes into the sharing mechanism.
Okay, and the Commission's October 22nd, 2019 final order made modifications to Columbia's PBR, or performance-based rate mechanism, or for short PBR. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And to your understanding, as you discussed in your pre-file testimony, what were these modifications?
The primary modifications, to the best of my recollection, is the Commission establishing the most recently negotiated rate as the replacement for the FERC-approved rate in the TCI mechanism.
Okay, so the Commission's final order changed the transportation cost index benchmark for two of the interstate pipelines from which Columbia takes service, from the rates approved by FERC to the current discounted rates negotiated by Columbia, correct?
That's my understanding, yes.
And the Commission did this because, in part, it stated that it wanted to continue to see improvement when negotiating pipeline rates. Is that your recollection?
Yes, that's my recollection.
And then did the Commission's final order also further adjust the benchmark within the transportation cost index for Columbia's storage service transportation contracts by adding percentage gross ups on top of FERC-approved rates?
There was, as I recall, there was a component of that allowed that benchmark to increase when there was a FERC-approved increase in a general rate case, is my recollection.
Okay. Can you briefly explain why Columbia has filed for rehearing in this case?
Yeah, several reasons. First is that assuming that you're in a status quo environment, then the commission's reasoning is understood in terms of them trying to increase the competitive component, although we're not in a static environment. Particularly on Columbia Transmission, they are in their 8th year of a modernization program that has invested to date approximately $2.1 billion in their modernization efforts. And that has resulted in rate case related cost increases. While TECO, or Columbia Transmission, has not filed a rate case per se since 1995. They did file in their Modernization 1 settlement that was accepted by FERC an adjustment mechanism that allows them to recover those demand costs under a tracker mechanism instead of a base rate increase. Pursuant to FERC's policy statement on modernization trackers in PL 15-1, the pipelines have essentially have an obligation to reset rates or go through a process to establish their current rates as just and reasonable. They did that as part of the Modernization 1 settlement, which was approved by FERC. So we're in an environment where the base costs, or those costs that are deemed to be just and reasonable by FERC, are increasing. And so by forcing the company into using a prior benchmark as, or a prior negotiated rate as a benchmark going forward, puts us at a greater risk because of the challenges associated with the increasing just and reasonable rates that the pipeline can charge pursuant to the FERC rate structure and the FERC rate rule.
Okay, thank you. So just to back up a little bit and to clarify, the commission order had made some modifications to Columbia's PBR, and the two interstate pipelines that we're discussing that it would affect is the Tennessee Gas Pipeline and the Columbia Gas Transmission Corporation Pipeline. Is that correct?
Correct. Those are two of the three companies that we currently receive service from.
Okay. What is the third company?
The third company is Central Kentucky Transmission.
Okay. And so once again, I know you just touched on this, but I just want to make sure that we clarify for the record that in your testimony you were discussing, and just now you were discussing the capital cost recovery mechanism, or CCRM for short, that Columbia Gas Transmission Corporation has added on to its FERC-approved rate. Is that correct?
That's correct. That's the mechanism that Columbia Transmission utilizes to recover their investment through their modernization proceedings. Okay.
And I know you touched a little bit on the modernization program, but could you go a little bit more in depth, such as it looks like in your testimony previously you said that this modernization program helped replace bare steel and cast and iron pipeline. Can you go a little bit more in depth into that for the commissioners?
Certainly. The Modernization 1 program had two primary components to it. One was the replacement of bare steel, cast iron in the system, also the replacement of pipeline that, even though it might have been coated, would have been what was classified as pre-71 pipe, which is at greater risk of failure because of the style of coatings that were put on pipelines at that time. So looking at those areas, looking at those high consequence areas that are most at risk, portions of those pipes were replaced. Also, there was modernization relative to aged compression on the system. So I don't have the exact number, but it was somewhere, if I recall right, in excess of 100,000 horsepower that was replaced by Columbia Transmission on their system, as well as adding new diagnostic packages that allowed a real-time assessment of compressor operations that could lead the pipeline into seeing if there were potential failures within a compressor station. So if there was a bearing going bad or something like that, or some level of vibration that may not be easily detected in person, but the software package could detect that and alert the pipeline to that to prevent either a large failure or a large downtime caused by a compressor outage. So that modernization package in Mod 1 included that. In Mod 2, there was an added component to that, and that was restoration of storage deliverability out of the Columbia Transmission storage field.
Okay. And is it accurate to state that it is beginning its 8th year of this modernization program?
It is in the
Eighth
eighth
year.
year, yes.
Okay. And phase 1 investment was roughly 1.5 billion, and phase 2 investment was roughly 1.13 billion.
That was
Does
the
that sound
planned
correct?
investment. Yes, the planned investment was 1.13, although they may not make that number. They're working on those projects this year, and whether that'll be finished or not is to be seen.
Okay. And this capital cost recovery mechanism, that is incorporated into the Columbia Transmission Corporation's rates as a FERC-approved rider. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
And you discussed how, in your pre-file testimony, Columbia worked tirelessly to negotiate its capacity contracts to not become subject to the CCRM rider when it was approved by FERC. Is that accurate?
Yes, it is.
So can you explain to the commission in as non-confidential terms as possible how Columbia was able to negotiate to not be subject to this expensive rider?
Yeah, I'll try the best I can there. Negotiation is somewhat of an art, if you will, in the process of making your point to try to demonstrate why the value you're seeking is the appropriate way. We had continued throughout the process of modernization to impress upon Columbia Transmission that we had alternatives, and that if we were to be exposed to these rider costs, that at the earliest possibility that we would have had, we would, look and potentially choose those alternatives as a cheaper cost of resources to serve our customer. We were able to impress upon them that was a reality that they faced, and that it was, a significant, if not vast majority of the services that we take from Columbia Transmission was at risk for us going to a third party. We have direct experience with an affiliate that has a discounted contract that does pay the CCRM rider, simply because the pipeline did not feel that they were, and I hate to speak for them, so my interpretation, they didn't feel that they were as significantly at risk as they were with Columbia Gas of Kentucky, where a large majority of our services could have been moved over to a third-party pipeline.
Okay, and are you at liberty to say what the third-party pipeline would be? Would it be the Tennessee Gas Pipeline or the Central Kentucky Pipeline?
So there were multiple pipelines that we could use to perform this. Tennessee is one of them. Texas Eastern Transmission is another. I always refer to them as Texas Gas was another that we have had discussions with as possible opportunities. Each one of those could serve portions of our service territory that could have a significant impact on the level of services that Columbia Transmission would provide to us.
Okay. In discovery responses, you stated that while Columbia would not have changed its approach in Columbia Gas Transmission's modernization discussions if it did not have a PBR mechanism, Columbia cannot assume with complete assurance that Columbia Gas Transmission would have granted avoidance of the CCRM if it knew Columbia did not have a PBR mechanism. Do you recall this response?
Yes, ma'am.
Can you explain why Columbia Gas Transmission would not have granted avoidance of this CCRM rider if it knew Columbia did not have a PBR mechanism?
Well, I think simply stated is that we're in the same business. And there's a recognition by the pipeline of the fact that to the extent that we have an incentive mechanism, that it would be beneficial to them as well to see that that mechanism went forward in terms of, you know, how they would be viewed, you know, by various public utilities that they have to go before. They, I can say is it's more of a gut reaction, having dealt with the pipeline for almost 30 years, to know that, you know, what they value and what they don't value. And my sense is that they value the relationship and don't want to be shown in a negative light. And the other kind of thing that comes into play here is the fact that we have a very large storage position in our portfolio. And the value of our maintaining that storage position is of significant value to the pipeline.
So, just to clear everything up here, Columbia Gas Transmission Pipeline, are they no longer an affiliate of Columbia Gas of Kentucky?
That is correct. We are no longer affiliated with Columbia Transmission.
Okay. So we're still having trouble understanding why Columbia Gas Transmission would think that Columbia of Kentucky having a PBR would be beneficial in these negotiations for the CCRM rider. You're saying it's just a gut instinct that you thought that they would think it's beneficial?
Well, I can say that, you know, I've made that comment to them directly and have not had any negative reactions to that comment from them. So in part is the fact that, you know, them not rejecting the argument that I set forth to them of the value of the PBR to us is part of my response, because they have not rejected my argument to them in the process of negotiation as being of value to them.
But it seems like most likely the main argument that most likely prevailed would be that you had this alternative. You had this alternative, multiple alternative pipelines that you could have gone to if Columbia would have required you all to pay that CCRM rider, correct?
I believe that's correct, yeah. I think that is the primary motivating factor.
Okay, and so whether or not you had a PBR was not really a central negotiation point. It wasn't central to the discussion.
Right. not the
I'm
primary
sorry.
point.
Okay.
Not the primary point, yeah.
Thank you. So Columbia advised in discovery responses that it would be renegotiating its contract with Columbia Gas Transmission, which was set to expire on March 31st, 2020. Can you provide an update on these contract negotiations?
So the contract negotiations have several components to them. One is modifying the contract quantity to be more attuned to what our current forecasts are on design day demands. That, as a result of that, we needed to reduce our portfolio. And so we entered into negotiations with Columbia Transmission, recognizing that reduction was necessary. Consequently, we entered into an agreement with Columbia Transmission that will have us seeking to abandon the capacity rights under Central Kentucky Transmission, and then Central Kentucky Transmission then abandoning their rights to a 25% undivided interest in Columbia Transmission's KA1 North facilities. Coupled with that, we have terminated our Columbia Gulf contract, and we had a small reduction in our SST and FSS quantities. The alternatives that we had would basically keep Central Kentucky and reduce more SST and FSS. Our economic evaluation indicated that it was better for our customers to retain more storage and get rid of the CKT and Columbia Gulf capacity. And that's those contracts went into effect April 1, and the Central Kentucky contract continues in effect until FERC approves abandonment of the facilities currently owned by Central Kentucky Transmission, by abandonment to sell to Columbia Transmission.
Okay, commission staff is going to issue a post-hearing data request. So on this new contract. So you're saying the contract was entered April 1st, 2020. And so I'm assuming you would have a contract that you could file into the record, even if it's under a subject of confidentiality?
Yes, we could.
Okay. And when you said modifying contract quantity, I think I heard you say it's a reduction. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And do you know why you need the reduction?
The reduction is to align the portfolio to our current design day forecast.
Okay. Okay, we will issue some post-hearing data requests on this issue and possibly ask a few additional questions as well, since this is not in the record. Can you please refer to your response to Commission staff's second rehearing request for information, item 13B, and tell me when you're there?
Is that a data request? I'm sorry, I'm just talking to my counsel here. Is that a data request that's in the approval by chance? Okay, 13B.
Yes.
Yeah, I am. That's that 213? Yes. Okay.
One of the negatives to not having in-person hearings.
Yeah, it's a little more difficult. Sometimes having things on paper is a little easier. Okay, I have that.
Okay. And do you see where it should start with Columbia is the beneficiary? Do you see that?
Yes.
Can you read that response into the record, please?
Certainly, it says Columbia is a beneficiary of incurring only a fraction of the costs it would incur should it directly employ individuals to perform the gas supply function it currently receives from NiSource Corporate Services Energy Supply and Optimization ES&O Department. ES&O management must direct the allocation of its limited resources to where the greater incentive is provided. Many incentive-related products are fungible, i.e. can be made available to multiple parties at various locations. Those parties that have the greater incentive to realize value from any given transaction will naturally rise to the top and be the first to execute an opportunity. If Columbia is not provided a reasonable incentive mechanism, it will not place itself at financial risk nor devote scarce resources that could otherwise be employed in less risky, greater reward activities.
Okay. So based on that response, is it Columbia's position that absent the transportation cost incentive mechanism as originally designed within the PBR that I believe was just approved in 2014, it will not devote resources to reducing the gas costs of Kentucky customers?
So let me make sure that everybody is clearly understands what transpires on a day-to-day basis. Under the current mechanism, and we think about the gas cost incentive mechanism, there is risk associated with the company going out there and purchasing gas day to day versus first of the month. So the incentive mechanism encourages the company to look at monthly purchases, to look at daily purchases, and then how those daily purchases can be either looked at weekly or even purchased weekly. Historically, before this incentive mechanism was there, the majority of our gas purchases were purchased at the first of the month. And that was deemed to have been an appropriate process. By going to a daily index, the company puts itself at greater risk and also has to devote a greater amount of manpower to that effort to look at those purchases day to day, making decisions, is this the right opportunity for us? Should we look at it another day? Should we wait until later in the month? Those are all decisions that require manpower to look at and evaluate on a daily basis. Whereas if we didn't have that, then that provides the incentive for the company to devote that. The alternative is to look at purchases on a more of a monthly basis that are still provided and conducted in a least cost manner. So because of the limited resources we have, the gas cost incentive helps us. Well, the problem with the gas cost incentive on a standalone basis, as is demonstrated in data that the company has filed in its GCR cases, shows that there are months where the company loses money on the GCI. And so consequently, if the company doesn't have an offset to that risk, then it really is disincentive to participate in that gas cost incentive mechanism if it is at financial risk under that defined process. The TCI provides the company that offset risk. And I don't think that we're saying that it has to be as it was originally designed in 2014, but what we are saying is that, you know, the company needs to have a reasonable incentive, recognizing that it's not a status quo scenario on the demand cost side on the pipeline, that we have been successful in avoiding the CCRM costs, and consequently, we need something to offset that gas cost incentive risk.
So I guess my question would be, before the transportation cost index was added to Columbia's PBR in 2014, are you saying that Columbia's PBR was a loss for the company? I can't imagine that Columbia would continue with the PBR for so long if you're saying the gas cost index sometimes is a loss.
The gas cost index was not a part of the sharing mechanism prior to the current approved process in 2014. We had an off-system sales and capacity sharing mechanism, but we did not have a gas cost incentive mechanism that could be penal to the company in its incentive mechanism.
So basically, we're just trying to understand, you know, that response where you're stating that if Columbia's not provided a reasonable incentive mechanism, that you know, possibly it's not going to devote resources. And I just want to get clarity on the record that absent the transportation cost incentive or even the PBR mechanism, would you assert on the record that Columbia would still do its due diligence to devote resources to reducing the gas cost as the most low-cost gas available?
Yeah, recognizing that you know, we don't have clairvoyance in terms of what the future costs are going to be. Gas costs in any given month can go up or down within the context of the month, and the current mechanism, we try to take advantage of that opportunity, but you know, that can always be viewed as having been, you know, the wrong choice. All we're saying is that, you know, if we're going to continue in a mechanism that requires the devotion of additional resources on a day-to-day basis to evaluate, you know, purchases, then we would continue a least cost program based upon monthly purchases versus one that tries to evaluate day-to-day and beating a daily index versus, you know, purchasing gas at the first of the month level.
But regardless of whether there's a PBR or not, Columbia would still devote resources to attempt to do its due diligence and purchase the cheapest, you know, lowest cost gas for its customers, correct?
That is correct, consistent with the purchase program that would be in place under that scenario.
Okay. And then moving on, in other discovery responses, you provided a list of 12 other states that have approved natural gas procurement PBR mechanisms. Do you recall that?
I'm not sure if I submitted that. Was that mine or Judy's or jointly? I know
I
that
believe
we
it was you both jointly.
Yeah, I know that we looked at opportunities that other states, provide incentive mechanisms.
Okay, and in our second staff request, we actually asked Columbia to confirm that, you only found 12 other states that have these PBR mechanisms. So would it be fair to say that Kentucky it seems to be in the minority of the country, really, of having a PBR mechanism?
I'd say Kentucky's on the forefront.
But if we're one of 12 states, it sounds like we're in the minority. Wouldn't you agree? Of states that have a PBR mechanism.
If one of 12 over one of 50 is minority, then yes. But again, I think it's been a recognition of the Commission of Foresight and the opportunities that these kinds of mechanisms create for value for the customer.
Out of the responses provided, are you aware whether any of the 12 states that you all provided that have PBR mechanisms, are you aware if any of those states have a dollar or percentage cap on the utility sharing portion?
I'm familiar with 6 of those companies, which are Columbia, Kentucky, and its LDC affiliates. In the 6 jurisdictions that we operate in, there is not a dollar cap that I recall in any of those jurisdictions. I can't, I don't think our investigation was as in depth to try to determine what the integrated specifics of each of those programs were. I think we were just trying to answer the question, are there other states that offer incentive mechanisms?
We have I'm sure you're aware, there's another PBR case with a different company that we have pending in front of us. And in that record, they have provided some more in-depth information on a few of the states that also have PBR mechanisms, where there are some sharing caps, either dollar or percentage-wise. So the commission staff is going to ask for a post-hearing data request for Columbia to dig into those 12 states a little bit more and then provide us information on whether or not there are the percentage or dollar caps on the utility share. And then just one last question. In your opinion, do you believe that a cap on a utility share portion could be constructed in a way that would still provide incentive to a utility and at the same time give the customers the benefit of as much gas savings as possible?
Well, yes and no. The problem with a cap is going to be that, the devotion of scarce resources to go above the cap. But at the same time, is it structured to give the company sufficient incentive to, offset the risks and provide it incentive to do so? So, it's to me, this is a policy question. It's not a gas supply question. And so, Witness Cooper might be a little bit better off to respond to that as a policy question. But from a pure gas supply question, I think it has its limitations.
Okay. And all we're doing is just trying to look at how the other states are approaching PBRs, in this era, and see if it's still needed or if it should be modified, and just get all the information we can into the record. So thank you very much, Mr. Anderson. I have no further questions, Vice Chairman.
Thank you,
Thank
Ms.
you.
Goad. I neglected to mention that we also have a staff attorney, Mr. Bowker, also involved in this process. Mr. Bowker, do you have any questions for Mr. Anderson?
I do not, sir, no.
Okay. Mr. Penny?
I do not.
Commissioner Matthews?
Let me unmute here. Ms. Gold answered many of my questions. I'm going to go back to that, what you call discount rate, which for an economist means something completely different. So, discounted transportation rate maybe would make it better for me. When was that negotiated?
So the original discount was negotiated in 2004. We most recently renegotiated that contract in 2019.
Okay. And that's what you will give a copy to Ms. Go, correct? In a
Yes, ma'am.
postal request. Okay. Has there been significant changes since 2004, other than the not being subject to the CCRM?
Oh, well, certainly. The availability of supply for the company has changed significantly. Prior to about 2008, the vast majority of gas that was consumed by the company originated in the Gulf Coast of the U.S. and was transported on gas pipelines that connected those Gulf Coast supplies into our market. Starting in about 2008 and then escalating thereafter, the development of the Marcellus Shale and Utica Shales in the tri-state region of Ohio, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia changed the flow dynamics on the interstate pipelines such that the majority of the gas that we now receive will come from the Appalachian Basin. Previously, I had indicated to Ms. Goad that we had terminated our Columbia Gulf contract and would be in the process of abandoning the Central Kentucky transmission. That activity is directly related to the development of the Marcellus and Utica shales that make that transportation path a lower cost alternative to what was the lower cost transportation path back in 2004.
Okay. Do you think you have, and I think Ms. Go touched on this, do you think you have the responsibility to negotiate to bring your monopoly customers their gas at the least cost with regard to the cost of gas, cost of transmission, and the cost of distribution?
Yes, I believe we have an obligation to acquire the most reasonable cost gas that we can find. Least cost in my vernacular really means lowest cost, assuming that reliability is priority one. And so we have to focus first and foremost on assuring reliability of service. And within the context of providing that reliability, we procure capacity and supply at the least cost.
And that reliability is probably looks very different than it did in 2004. You don't see gas price spikes when there's a hurricane in the Gulf anymore, and supplies to be more reliable in this part of the country.
No, I would agree with that comment that the development of the Utica Shale and the Marcellus Shale has enhanced the reliability, but reliability also comes in the context of making sure that you have the right pipeline capacity, it's available, you're on a firm basis. Interruptible capacity on pipelines is still interruptible capacity. So
Yeah.
reliability has to assure that, you have the supply, that you have the capacity, and that you have the resources available to assure that all of those supplies can be nominated and flow on the pipeline to ensure that we get the gas that our customers need.
And I'm going to just walk through this to make it more clear to myself. In 2014, prior to 2014, the utilities PBR consisted only of an off-system sales component. Is that correct? Did I hear you say that, Ms. Go?
I believe off-system sales and capacity release.
Okay. And then the gas cost incentive was added and the transportation cost incentive was added in 2014, correct?
Yes, and I think Ms. Cooper can address the dynamics a little bit better than I can, but my recollection was that was a request of the commission to file that PBR in the form that it was filed and approved by the commission.
Which of the states that your sister companies under the NiSource umbrella participate in have PBRs? And which do you know?
We have incentive sharing mechanisms in all 6 of the states in which we operate. They have various components to them. All of them will have an off-system sales and capacity release. Most of the states that we operate in, we do not have significant opportunity within the pipelines to provide competitive alternatives. So, for example, we operate in Virginia and Massachusetts and Pennsylvania, and in many of the areas of those states, there are no competitive alternatives to the existing pipeline resources. So, in Kentucky, we do have that opportunity where the competition exists and can provide that the opportunity to reduce transportation costs to the extent we can develop reasonable alternatives to the various competing pipelines.
So how do our costs to the customer in Kentucky, served by Columbia, Kentucky, compare to those other states? Virginia, for example.
I have not done a direct comparison of those costs.
I guess I'm looking for a competition drives prices down, sort of.
Well, I would say that Columbia, Kentucky and Columbia, Virginia would not be in competition from a gas cost perspective. Each one has their own portfolios, but
I'm saying that if there is competition in pipelines, the transportation cost for a Kentucky customer should be less than the transportation cost reflected in the Virginia customer, which has no competition for pipelines.
well, absolutely. We have a discount. Our capacity portfolio today has about roughly about 235,000 decatherms of capacity. And on that, we receive a discounted transportation rate on almost 210,000 at the city gate and another 15,000 upstream. So Kentucky, we have negotiated those rates below, the FERC approved just and reasonable rates. And so, whereas in Columbia Gas of Virginia, there is no alternative capacity options, and they pay the full pipeline demand max approved rates by FERC.
And that is not because you have a PBR for gas transportation, but it's because you have the ability to go to your transmission, to your pipeline and say, I have other options.
Yes.
Okay. That's all I have, sir.
Thank you. Morning, Mr. Anderson.
Good morning.
So if I understand, the tracker utilized by Columbia Transmission is set how often?
It's set annually today with rates to be effective February 1st of each year.
So at that point, they go through a true up from their spending, and that's how the tracker is determined?
Yes, they'll accumulate costs that they have spent through October of each year, and then through a formula developed in the settlement that includes the capital recovery and taxes and return. And then based upon the billing determinants that the pipeline has that are eligible to receive the CCRM under the settlement, that they calculate a rate for that each year. And that rate becomes cumulative throughout the program period with each successive investment year of the pipeline.
So when they develop this rate, how is it that they are able to negotiate with Columbia Gas and that rate excludes Columbia Gas? In other words, they have an amount they have to recover.
For the most part, those costs, when we negotiated an avoidance of the CCRM, the billing determinants associated with that discounted contract are excluded from the calculation. So the pipeline is basically recovering that proportionate share from other customers on the pipeline system.
And you believe that the reason why you're able to negotiate this better rate or this exclusion of the tracker cost is because you have other alternatives available, competitive alternatives that cause Columbia Transmission to recognize that there's a loss of business if they don't negotiate something that's favorable to Columbia, Kentucky. Is that right?
Yes.
So how often do you put out for bid a request for proposal to these alternatives in order to make certain that the rates that you're receiving from Columbia Transmission are the best?
But we would do that whenever the pipeline contracts are coming up for renegotiation. We this past cycle, we did not put out an RFP, and this is where it gets a little bit confidential, and I apologize for this.
We can go into a confidential session if that's something that you'd like to.
Yes, sir, I would, because this gets into the confidential negotiations with the pipeline.
Jeb, can you?
I'll go.
Yes, if you give us a second here, we'll go into a confidential session.
Thank you.
Because I am interested in the reason why Columbia Transmission has been the go-to and the only, as far as I know, at least for the majority of the transmission for Columbia, Kentucky, for the past however many years. I understand they used to be an affiliate, but they are not anymore.
You're gonna talk to her. Yeah, I think you can do it, can't you, Candace?
I don't know which video is on that shows.
So respectively to your statement about, do you believe the data is not stale data, that you're doing an analysis on an everyday current basis, and you believe that that is support enough for the decisions that are being made, and whether there's RFPs put out or whether you update a cost-benefit analysis? And I'm going to respectfully disagree, because that's my nature. I have an accounting degree and a business administration, master's of business administration, and I believe from an accounting perspective that in order to make decisions, historical data needs to be analyzed, but you also need to do it so that it does not become old data that you're relying on to make decisions. And that's what Columbia Gas is doing right now. You're taking your business experience and saying, you believe that based on all of the variables that go into it, that you can make this rough analysis, but it's not a detailed or a quantitative analysis that really shows you the number. And there's no number that comes to the commission that you provided staff. And believe me, we've been on staff in order to make sure that we look at this from the perspective of what the commissioners are trying to do, and they're doing a good job of trying to analyze that. But really, there's nothing that, when we look at it, that says the data that's being provided is really being updated. We're trying to base this incentive payment off of information that's been provided and continues. It's not a dynamic or moving to upscale into the future. It's always based on the past, and I understand being based on the past, but not 16 years in the past, or whatever it is, the last time a cost-benefit analysis was done. And I think that's the issue that the commission is trying to reconcile here. And I know in the initial order there was a target that was set, and Columbia believes that that is too aggressive. If you were to offer something that you would say is more reasonable, what would you say Columbia Gas would believe that the target should be, rather than what the commission proposed?
I know that we set forth in testimony what we believe to be an appropriate rate, and let me see if I can call that up real quickly, but basically it's a recognition going back to 2014, what were the Columbia transmission base rates at that time, plus the CCRM over time would form as the basis for the TCI calculation. That recognizes the fact that we've avoided the the CCRM cost over time. It also recognizes that we were a part of a negotiation in the Modernization 2 settlement that reduced base rates. And so, we recognize that as being a valid component as well. That, if there's a reduced base rate, then obviously there should be a reduced incentive in that sense. But we have set forth in testimony that that particular proposal.
So are you searching for it now?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Take your time.
page 10. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry, this is Judy's. Okay, so I apologize. This is actually in Ms. Cooper's testimony.
Okay.
I know we look at all that all the time, but yeah, so I mean, basically, in her testimony on page 10, we establish a proposal that would calculate a percentage change that the commission referred to in terms of bait race resets in the order that would be applied to the current applicable pipeline. So, for example, in 2014, in Ms. Cooper's testimony, the base rate was $4.83, and then the applicable rate earlier in 2019 was $6.61. That the delta there of $1.78 was primarily the change related to the impact of the CCRM that we were able to avoid.
So you agree that even though the program has been in effect for some time, and that I think you were asked if you agreed that Kentucky was in the minority as far as states that offer some kind of sharing program, and you indicated that we were at the forefront, that program modifications, when you're one of a few, may need to be made at times in order to make sure that the program is reflective of what the intent was. And that's a reasonable statement, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I would. Yes, I agree. Are the states that we have experience in have on occasion, not real frequently, but have on occasion re-looked at the incentive mechanisms and made adjustments to that.
So I just have one more line of questioning here, and I believe that you said that Columbia devotes significant resources, at least to the daily purchase of gas, and I don't know how often, it's daily, monthly, I don't know what goes in between there, how often you're making these forward purchases, whether it's primarily daily or whether it's spread out so that you stagger the periods.
So let me, I'll try to put this in maybe some context. I have in my organization two natural gas purchasers whose primary role is the procurement of natural gas supplies and development of incentive mechanism products and the sale of those products under incentive programs in 5 jurisdictions: Ohio, Kentucky, Pennsylvania, Virginia, and Maryland. Columbia of Kentucky, when we look at this from a capacity perspective, represents somewhere around 5% of that total portfolio that those two procurement individuals manage day to day. I don't have exact numbers, but I know that one of those traders, the procurement specialist, spends probably 20% of their time looking at options just for Columbia of Kentucky. And so there's, because of the incentive mechanism, there's a disproportionate share of time of those individuals allocated to or serving Columbia Gas of Kentucky. And we also have to then schedule all that activity on the natural gas pipelines as well. So we do devote a larger share of those individuals' time to the development and execution of purchases under those systems. Typically, in our other jurisdictions, we're primarily purchasing majority of our gas first of the month, and most of their activity thereafter then is involved in meeting storage targets as well as developing opportunities for the incentive mechanisms in each of those other jurisdictions. So when I say, we do devote a disproportionate share to this program, Columbia of Kentucky is a beneficiary of having that consolidated organization, and yet incurring, only a fraction of the cost that we would incur should we have an organization specifically dedicated to Columbia Gas of Kentucky. Hopefully that answers your question.
Well, I'm going to ask you to clarify it for me. So are we talking, when you say significant resources, you're talking about two people at the corporate level there's a percentage of their costs being allocated to Kentucky, but who actually spend more than the amount of purchases that are made, and so therefore, rather than being at a 5% level, they're really spending 20% of their time, but the allocation is only 5%?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, but it's...
And it's not necessarily purchases per se, it's really the amount of transactions that occur, because the transaction time and the effort to purchase 5,000 decatherms is the same as it is 25,000 decatherms. So we're really talking about transaction-related kinds of activities, not necessarily volumetric.
But are we only talking two individuals and a portion of their time as being significant?
No, that's just two traders. We also have schedulers that have to transact that business. We also have planners that look at the daily plan and what can be done and what limitations we have on a daily basis, as well as the management personnel supervising those individuals.
So all of those costs are allocated to Columbia of Kentucky and included in base rates, aren't they?
Yes, sir, I believe so.
So when you receive an incentive payment, do you net out any of the costs of that incentive payment that is already included in the base rates?
No, sir.
Why would that not be the case? Because aren't you basically, shouldn't this be a net incentive, not the ratepayer pays here for the cost for these transactions, but then has to share in the benefit with Columbia because they've already paid for the cost, but now they only get a portion of what the savings are. There's no net. This isn't a net transaction here.
I would respectfully disagree. I think the sharing mechanism inherently with the 70-30 and then 50-50 recognizes the value proposition to the customers from the dedication of those employees to those efforts.
Okay, I understand your position and won't push that any farther. I don't think I have any other questions. Ms. Wanchek, do you have a redirect?
If I could just have 1 minute.
Ms. Wanchek, are you there?
Sorry, I was on mute. If I could just have 1 minute, just to look over my notes, please.
Sure. Were we putting you to sleep and you were?
No, I'm just trying to figure out my computer. It's fine. Hold on 1 second. I don't have any redirect at this time.
Okay, so I'm going to ask one last chance for Ms. Goode if she would like to ask any further questions.
We have no further questions for Mr. Anderson.
Mr. Bowker, do you have any questions?
No further questions.
Mr. Penny?
No, Your Honor.
Dr. Matthews?
I do not, sir.
Okay, I think this witness can be excused. Thank you, Mr. Anderson. And given that it's now 25 to 11, I'd like to take a break until about, until 5 to 11, and then we'll come back on record and see if we can finish this up before lunch. Is that okay with everybody?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Very good.
We're in recess until 10:55. Thank you. We're back in session. We've completed the testimony of Mr. Anderson. Ms. Wanchek, do you have another witness?
Might be taking a little time to get back to,
Maybe.
there's Angela. She's back.
Let's see.
Well, it's not quite, this clock is, well, it says 10:55, so.
There's Angela, there's Ms. Wanchek.
I am just waiting on Ms. Cooper to return.
It's okay. So we'll see if Ms. Cooper pops up here. I think that's going to be the next witness, isn't it?
That's correct.
Yes.
I'm here. I'm going to try my camera and see if it will work.
There you go. You're on there.
I am? Okay.
Ms. Wanchek,
I can't see y'all, but that's okay.
you can't see us?
As long as you can see me. No, but that's okay. I've got sound and you can see me, so that's all right.
Okay, because we're going to swear you in, and when she introduces you, so just so you know, you might not.
Okay.
Ms. Wanchek, she's all yours.
Yes, thank you. I'd like to call Ms. Judy Cooper.
Hello?
Okay, Ms. Cooper, can you see us now?
No?
All right, well, raise your right hand anyways. We're going to swear you in, okay?
Okay.
Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give is true and correct under penalty of perjury?
I do.
Okay, Ms. Wanchek, please proceed.
Thank you. Ms. Cooper, can you please state your name and title for the record?
I'm Judy Cooper, Director of Government and Regulatory Affairs for Columbia Gas of Kentucky.
Thank you. And did you cause testimony to be filed on your behalf on January 3rd of 2020?
I did.
Have you had an opportunity to review that testimony?
Yes.
Do you have any changes or corrections to your testimony?
No, I do not.
If I were today to ask you the same questions contained in your testimony, would your answers be the same?
Yes.
The witness is available for cross-examination.
Ms. Goode?
Yes, thank you, Vice Chairman. Good morning, Ms. Cooper.
Good morning.
To your knowledge, did the commission initially approve of performance-based rate mechanisms, or the PBR mechanisms, in the late 90s and early 2000s due to high natural gas prices and price volatility?
I believe that's correct.
And would you agree that for around about the past decade at least, natural gas prices have been at historic lows with little to no price volatility and in abundant supply?
I think the market has changed dramatically in a lot of different ways from what we were seeing in the not in the early to mid 90s, late 90s. The first part of the 2000s, there were certainly much higher prices than there are today. But the dynamics of the industry have changed, as Mr. Anderson described somewhat in his testimony. The volatility is not to the same degree, but there is still volatility in pricing. And now the pricing is very different geographically because there are new markets that back in when these programs first originated, there was all of the supply came from the Gulf. And so the industry is very different. And I think that the mechanisms have adjusted and have been revised as the times have moved along. reflective of those changing market conditions.
So you would agree, though, that for around the past decade, that natural gas prices have been at historic lows and that we have an abundance of supply now? In addition to what you just stated, would you agree to that?
Broadly, yeah, I mean that we do enjoy low natural gas prices now relative to the extreme peaks of 2000, 2001. So we are enjoying much lower prices compared to that time, and also a tremendous amount of supply. And we hope that continues.
Okay. So you do agree that in this current environment concerning the price and availability of natural gas, that in 2020, we are in a very different period than when the commission initially approved the PBRs over 20 years ago. It's just different.
I think
different circumstances.
The markets are different, but I think the idea behind the incentive to incent an LDC to go out and take steps beyond and above what is otherwise the reasonable best cost purchasing strategy, and the whole idea of a performance-based rate-making mechanism is to incentivize behavior that produces greater results for the benefit, and that benefit is shared between customers and the company, and those results are over and above what would otherwise be considered and what is a reasonable purchasing strategy.
Okay. So I believe you're answering my next question, which was based in the change in circumstances of over the past 20 years of the different markets that, you know, we're experiencing now versus 20 years ago when the PBR was initially established by the commission. Do you think a PBR is still necessary and required?
I think that it is a tremendous benefit for customers. You know, is it necessary or required for a utility to go out and pursue the least cost reliable source of supply? It is not, I wouldn't say required, but the over and above benefits that it produces are benefits over and above what are required.
Okay, I'll ask you the same question that I asked Mr. Anderson previously. But wouldn't you agree that it is Columbia is required to perform its due diligence to go and purchase the least cost gas to provide to its customers, regardless of a PBR or not?
The least costs consistent with reliability. Yes, that is our obligation as a utility, and that's what we want to do for our customers. We compete in a competitive market. You know, everybody is not a customer of ours. They have other energy options, and so we are very cognizant of our pricing methodology.
And from the just review of the totality of the record, it appears that Columbia is saying that they do think a PBR is still needed, maybe not required, but they still want to have a PBR. But based on these changing circumstances that we're discussing over the past 20 years, do you not think it's at least reasonable for that PBR to be modified?
It has been modified, and it was modified in 2014. And I think that those modifications, you know, they have been around for, I guess it's 6 years now, about going on 6 years. And I think that those modifications that were made then certainly put a new rigor into the procurement of the gas commodity cost, and they seem to me to still be reasonable incentive mechanisms and benchmarks because they are tied to commodity price, demand price, and then off-system sales activity that are transactions that are entered into outside of what would otherwise be procurement for system supply.
I understand that you're referencing the modifications from the 2014 case. I was actually referencing the more recent modifications in the 2019 case. Do you understand why PBRs need to be modified based on the natural gas market fluctuating throughout the past 20 years?
I understand, yes, I understand that the modification that the commission made in the 2019 order was to the transportation cost index, and that modification, I disagree with that modification because it eliminates any incentive whatsoever by replacing the benchmark, which previously was the rate approved by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, the FERC, that we all commonly refer to it as the FERC, and their rate-making authority for interstate pipelines is the same as the Commission's rate-making authority for in-state and for state regulation. The FERC has the authority for interstate pipelines, and the interstate pipelines are the source of the demand contracts, which are the component of the transportation cost index. And if the modification made by the commission in the 2019 order resets that benchmark from the FERC-approved fair, just, and reasonable rate to the rate that Columbia negotiated as its current discounted rate. And to me, that eliminates any incentive whatsoever, and the ability to obtain, retain that discount is very much a matter of the negotiating expertise and the poker face of Mr. Anderson involved in those negotiations, because the FERC-approved rate is truly the fair, just, and reasonable rate and what should be the benchmark.
Can you elaborate how those modifications in the order could affect Mr. Anderson negotiating a rate?
I'm not involved in the negotiations. I just can speak to what the benchmark is and what is the fair, just, and reasonable rate as determined by the appropriate regulatory authority for interstate pipeline rates.
But did I hear
I
you
can't.
Just now? I thought you said that these modifications could affect Mr. Anderson's poker face when negotiating for rates.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I may have confused that. What I said was that the ability to negotiate, the ability of Mr. Anderson to negotiate something that differs from a FERC-approved rate is a credit to his expertise and his poker face in negotiating something that is other than the fair, just, and reasonable rate approved by FERC.
Okay, so just to clear everything up, your testimony today is that the modifications made will not affect Mr. Anderson's ability to negotiate those lower pipeline rates that are below the FERC approved rate.
Yeah, I can tell you that it changes the benchmark, but I can't tell you how it affects his ability to negotiate because I'm not a part of those negotiations, and I don't know, how that would impact his ability to negotiate.
Okay.
And that's what you were asking me.
Yes, I thought that you had said that the modifications made in the order would negatively affect Mr. Anderson's ability to negotiate those pipeline contracts, and I just wanted to clear everything up for the record that that was not your testimony today.
You thought I said, could you restate that again, please?
I thought that you had said that the modifications made in the final order in October by the commission would negatively affect Mr. Anderson's ability to negotiate the pipeline rates below the FERC rate.
Oh, if I did not mean to state that, that is not my testimony. I would have to let Mr. Anderson answer that question as to how the change in the benchmark affects his ability to negotiate a rate. My testimony is that the change in that benchmark does affect the savings for our customers.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify the record because when I discussed that issue with Mr. Anderson, he had stated that the PBR was basically in the background and that the majority of the arguments, the main negotiation point was that you had multiple other options for pipeline, capacity. So I just wanted to clear the record. So moving on.
If I may say, that maybe was in part during the confidential session, and as far as how the modification impacts his ability to negotiate, I'm not testifying to that aspect of the change in the benchmarks.
Okay. My conversation with Mr. Anderson was not in the confidential session. It was only the vice chairman's conversation. So that was not confidential information.
Okay.
All right. Moving on. Ms. Cooper, to the best of your knowledge, are there only 3 natural gas companies in the state of Kentucky that have a PBR mechanism?
Yes.
And are those companies Atmos Energy Corporation, Louisville Gas and Electric Company, and Columbia Gas of Kentucky?
Yes, as far as I know.
Can you explain why Duke Energy of Kentucky does not have a PBR mechanism?
I do not know.
Do you know why Delta Natural Gas Inc. does not have a PBR mechanism?
I do not know, no.
Do you know why no other natural gas company in Kentucky has a PBR mechanism except for the 3 that we mentioned?
No, I do not.
So you all have never discussed it at any meetings or any type of conferences as to why they chose not to have a PBR mechanism?
No, it's never been discussed, or not in many conversations that I've been a part of.
Can you explain how all of the other natural gas utilities in Kentucky are able to procure low-cost, reliable gas supply without a PBR mechanism?
I can't explain how anyone else procures their natural gas. Really, Mr. Anderson would have to explain how we procure ours.
Would you agree that one could presume from these facts that PBR mechanisms are not required to provide reliable, low-price natural gas to customers, since only 3 in the whole state actually have PBR mechanisms?
What are you asking me to presume?
I said, could you presume from this set of facts that PBR mechanisms are not required to provide reliable, low-price natural gas to customers?
I believe I said that initially, that it's not required. It provides an added benefit. That is a decrease in savings, or a decrease in cost, a savings to customers over and above what is otherwise the least cost reliable cost of gas.
And did Columbia file for rehearing in part because it does not agree with the modifications to the transportation incentive component as we previously discussed?
Yes.
For the next few questions, I will provide a document for your review. So Brenda, can you please share PSC's exhibit number 1? I advised your counsel of it yesterday, and I believe she was going to attempt to have it for you.
Oh, I can see it. Okay. Yes,
Let
I
me know
can
when
see
you have it
the,
in front of you.
I can see what you're showing me. Yes.
Okay.
I still can't see faces, but I can see what's labeled as PSC Exhibit 1.
Okay, and do you recognize this exhibit as from case number 2020-143? It's Columbia's April 29, 2020 purchase gas adjustment application, and this is Schedule 6, which sets out the annual calculation of the PBR adjustments.
I think so. Can you make it go down a little bit, please? Or so I can. I think that's what it is.
Did that help?
I can't see the whole. Yes, that's getting there. Yes, that is from our GCA filing as you described. Yes.
And on this page 1 of 1 of Schedule 6, is it accurate that it shows the different components of the PBR adjustment for each month?
Yes.
And is it correct that this document demonstrates the magnitude of Columbia's sharing pursuant to its PBR transportation incentive component, both in the months immediately preceding the Commission's October 22nd, 2019 final order, as well as in the months that follow the order?
Through March of 2020, yes.
Okay. For the months April through October of 2019, can you please provide the lowest monthly company performance share for the transportation costs?
For which months do you say?
From April through October of 2019, what were the lowest monthly company performance share for transportation costs?
Let me see if I can make it bigger so I can see it.
And if you have issues seeing the numbers, then I can always give you the numbers subject to check.
Looks like the lowest one, April 2000, okay, thank you. From April 2019 to October 2019, the lowest transportation cost was $242,336.68.
And that was in April of 2019, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And what was the highest company share from April through October 2019?
The highest was October 2019 at 266,140.62.
And just as a side note, that amount is a little lower than it would have been without the commission issuing the order modifying the terms, correct?
That amount, the November amount reflects the modification. I'm gonna.
I believe it's located in possibly footnote 2. The October 2019 calculation is reflected downward based on that new calculation since the order was entered October 22nd, 2019.
22nd. Okay, that's what I was trying to remember when the order, what the order date was. Did you say that's footnoted?
Yes, it's footnoted, footnote 2.
Okay, I can't see that on,
the schedule. Okay, well, we can just do it subject to check that amount was probably a bit of a downward adjustment due to the commission's order.
because that month
And
was
then-
probably prorated.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, the month was probably prorated, based on the date of the commission's order occurring during the month rather than at the beginning or end of a month.
And then, what was the lowest company transportation cost share? So now we're looking after the order was issued in October of 2019, from November of 2019 through March of 2020. What was the lowest company transportation cost share?
14194.34.
In November of 2019. Okay.
I'm sorry, no,
And then what was the highest company transportation cost share in that same period?
let's see. January of 2020, the amount was 19,559.67.
Okay. So just in general, those numbers are very different before and after the commission's October 2019 order, correct? Those transportation
That's
cost
correct.
shares.
That's
So
correct.
is it Columbia's position in this rehearing that the savings and the retainment that Columbia experienced with the transportation costs before the October 2019 order is appropriate, and that it has to be that large to incentivize Columbia to secure the lowest cost, the lowest possible transportation cost for its customers?
So as Mr. Anderson described, the benchmark in the months prior to and part of October 19 was the FERC approved rate. The transportation cost index actually has in it the FERC approved benchmark for the demand contracts, and it also reflects capacity release. That those credits are also a part of the transportation cost index. These amounts are appropriate, and it does reflect a significant change. I would want to make sure that the understanding here, the benefit of the savings, transportation costs, the higher amounts in the earlier months and the lesser amounts in the months beginning November of 2019. If that amount of savings flowed through to the benefit as a reduction in gas costs to our customers, and the customers get the full benefit of that cost on an annual basis, Columbia is allowed to recover the company's share through this adjustment. So the customers received, since beyond the 2% threshold, it's a 50-50 sharing. This will not be exact, but on the transportation cost, you could, and it's not exact, but roughly guess that the savings to customers were double the amounts that are shown in the transportation cost column in each of those prior months. And since November of 2019, the amount that is retained by the company is certainly, or now being recovered by the company, significantly less.
Thank you, Cabrenda. I believe we can take down the exhibit now. And Vice Chairman, in a post-hearing data request, the commission staff will be asking Columbia to file this PBR information into our current record. This information came in a separate application after our discovery time had expired. So we will also be asking additional, more detailed information requests in those post-hearing requests for information. And Ms. Cooper, referring to your direct testimony, is it accurate that you provide an alternative calculation for the Columbia Gas transmission benchmark, assuming that the commission is not willing to use the FERC-approved rate as the benchmark?
Yes.
And using your alternative calculation, sorry, I'm trying to get it in front of me. Columbia is proposing that the Columbia Gas transmission benchmark is $5.729. Is that correct?
On page 10 of my testimony, yes, that's correct.
Yes, listed as the new Columbia transmission benchmark. And
Yes.
that is using the $4.1850 discount rate from Columbia Gas Transmission, and then applying the calculated gross up factor of 36.9%. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And you have that calculation of the 36.9% gross up factor on page 10 as well, correct?
Yes. Yes, ma'am.
Do you recall where you got the $4.831 number?
The 4.831 was the, it's stated here as the applicable, that would be Columbia Gas Transmission Pipeline demand rate at the time the PBR was approved in 2014, I believe.
So in other words, would that be the base SST tariff rate for 2014?
Gosh, I had all of that. I'm going to, I received that rate from Mr. Anderson, so I'm going to ask him, or ask you if you wouldn't mind to ask him that question to confirm, because I don't have that in my notes to be able to state specifically that it was the SST rate.
Okay. So I think the rest of that line of questioning, you're just deferring to Mr. Anderson, correct? Because I was going to also ask you where you got the $6.612 number, and if that's the Columbia Gas Transmission SST rate. So do you want to defer that to Mr. Anderson as well?
Yes, please. He provided that information to me.
Okay. And I can reiterate when Mr. Anderson comes back on the stand, but basically commission staff's going to have quite a few questions, post-hearing questions on this alternative calculation.
Okay.
Ms. Cooper, can you provide Columbia's 2019 net income, PBR profit, and PBR percentage of net income?
I have not done those calculations.
Vice Chairman, the commission staff will request this information in post-hearing discovery requests. Subject to check, 2019, would the PBR percentage of net income of 24.5% sound correct?
I haven't done those calculations. I don't have any idea.
Okay. Well, subject to check, based on the commission staff's calculations, the 2019 PBR percentage of net income for Columbia will be 24.5%. For 2018, it was 18.2%. And for 2017, it was 27.2%. Ms. Cooper, doesn't this seem a bit excessive and unreasonable for a PBR profit?
I don't see any of those calculations. I don't have any way to gauge what you're actually looking at there. So I can't respond.
Well, just in general and subject to check, if a PBR percentage of the net income is a quarter of a business's net income, would that not seem a bit high?
If that's the case, it seems like we probably are needing to file a base rate case because we're probably way under earning if that's the case.
Well, the commission staff is going to ask all of these questions in post-hearing data requests, and then you'll be able to get your numbers and be able to file everything into the record.
Okay.
Except for the deferral of questions to Mr. Anderson, I have no further questions for Ms. Cooper. Thank you, Ms. Cooper.
Thank you, Ms.
Okay,
Claude.
thank you.
Mr. Bowker, do you have any questions?
No, sir.
Mr. Penny?
I do not, Your Honor.
Dr. Matthews?
Just a couple. When you mentioned earlier that there are other sources of energy for customers and that competition is an incentive for a gas utility to keep its rates low, what were those? What is that competition that you're discussing?
Here in Kentucky, it's primarily electric competition, and remember that that it's not just the cost of the energy itself; it's also the installation cost and the cost to for the residential market. A builder who has to make a decision of whether he's going to pipe a home with the necessary with any appliances for natural gas, and that's a builder decision usually, sometimes a homeowner decision. It's a developer decision as to whether we can pipe a development, and that's an extra cost for a developer or a consumer that I hate to say it, but if they're all electric, you know, they would avoid those costs. They would also be cold, and they would not be using the most efficient fuel because natural gas as a resource is the most efficient source for heating, and so they would be avoiding those benefits in sacrificing that for a lower initial cost up front. And we're very aware of that, so we do all we can to compete against the price of electricity, which is our primary competition.
So the price of gas delivered to a home, which includes the cost of distribution, the cost of getting the gas, and the gas cost, right, is
right.
When those homeowners are making that decision for the next 20 years, my house I want to heat with gas or I want to heat with electric. You make internal forecasts about what you think the price of gas would be. Isn't that incentive for you to work hard at getting the least cost transportation and the least cost commodity to your customers?
It is, and you and others would make very rational decisions in choosing an energy source, but the sad reality is that many consumers today don't even know the source of energy to their home. So it's not always the same kind of analysis and decision that that you've described.
Do you think a builder in 2020 would be able to advertise positively that their subdivision they're building has gas available?
If you know, I don't know. The consumers, do they know what the source of their energy is, and do they care? I mean, today's market, I don't know.
I guess it's
I don't
pretty
know.
hard for me to understand that someone wouldn't know or care, but that's, I am an energy nerd. I can't help it. So the program was changed in 2014 to add the components of gas cost and transportation costs to the PBR program. Is that correct? Prior to that, it was off-system sales and capacity releases.
I'm sorry, I got a message that popped up here that my computer's gonna shut down, and I was trying to read how soon that's, because it's got in new. Could you ask me that again? I'm sorry. I think it's in an hour and 24 minutes, so I think we're good for 24 minutes.
I promise I won't be talking an hour and 24 minutes from now.
I'm sorry, I was.
In 2014, the PBR program was amended to include the gas cost incentive and the transportation cost incentive.
Yes, there was a gas cost incentive piece prior to 2014. It was quite different from what the gas cost incentive is now, and as it was revised in 2014.
What I would ask is, when you answer Ms. Goad's question about earnings and percent of earnings that is attributed to the PBR, if you would go back and look prior to 2013, let's go back to 2010, and show if that changed in 2014. And we'll give you
If the total percentage. Okay.
And that's all I have, sir.
Thank you. Ms. Cooper,
Yes, sir.
so you have testified that Columbia Gas, their procurement process goes above and beyond what would be a normal purchasing strategy. I think that was your testimony, correct?
Yes.
And it's over and above what is required, correct?
Yes.
But you
It's
have
over and above what is required.
You've also testified
Go ahead.
that it is your obligation or Columbia's obligation to have the least cost option for its ratepayers. So you agree that you have an obligation to procure gas at the least cost while remaining reliable, but yet with this program, it allows you to go over and above what that obligation is. How does that work? How can you be obligated to have the lowest cost option reliably, but you go over and above that because you're incentivized?
The program is the reliability at the least cost or best cost. That is the obligation of an LDC to procure gas. The ability to do that is established in two ways. Well, the benchmarks, I guess, or the criteria for evaluating that are established in two ways. One is the market itself for those elements that are deregulated. So the price of the natural gas commodity itself is deregulated, and the market determines what would be the least cost or best cost source of supply, And for those elements that are not deregulated, those rates are determined to be fair, just, and reasonable through a proceeding of the respective regulatory body. In this case, for interstate pipelines, that's the FERC. So for the transportation cost index, I believe that the FERC authorized rate is the fair, just, and reasonable rate. The ability to secure a discount and negotiate is over and above that fair, just, and reasonable rate. And the savings that then go to the benefit of the customers and the company partakes in a share of that. That's the standard is the fair, just, and reasonable rate. For commodity purchases, the marketplace determines the measure and the gauge of the reasonableness of the supply purchases. But those supply purchases are made in advance, and market prices change. And as an LDC, to secure the reliability that's required for the firm service to meet our peak day, we have to commit to those purchases in advance. And so various indices are used, and Mr. Anderson can certainly explain more of that, because that's his area of expertise, not mine. But I think that the incentive makes an opportunity available that human behavior, you can go out and create other exchanges, other transactions, and take on some risk in doing those transactions, because there is a benefit that that offsets some of that risk. But you wouldn't take those risks in being able to meet your firm peak day supply without, you wouldn't do that. You do that over and above, transactions. And I'm not an expert in gas purchasing, but I do understand that creating those opportunities is what these incentives are all about, and why they were created originally by the commission. And I think they have produced good results and favorable results for our customers and the company.
So you're implying that the least cost obligation for Columbia Gas in a regulated market is the FERC rate, and there's no obligation to try to negotiate anything less than that, because that's the rate established, and therefore the tracker that has been eliminated because of the negotiation by Mr. Anderson, that would never happen unless there was this incentive?
I don't know if it would never happen or not, but the incentive creates it does what it does. It provides an incentive.
But your obligation is to provide the least cost option, and you'd already done business with Columbia Transmission for many, many years, and so you would have been negotiating with them anyways. And I think I've already had the discussion with Mr. Anderson that I still haven't seen a true cross-benefit analysis since 2004. So I'm not, there's only 3 gas suppliers in Kentucky that are receiving this benefit. Are we implying that the others, such as Duke and Delta, don't have the obligation to do the least cost option because they aren't incentivized?
Not at all. We all have that obligation. And whether an LDC devotes the resources to go out and try to create savings that are a lower cost than the best cost, otherwise reliable, least cost rate. It does take a commitment. It takes a level of expertise. And I don't know why Duke hasn't done that. I don't know why Delta hasn't done that. Some of it may be dependent upon their portfolio and their purchasing strategies, whether they have their own sources of supply, geographic location. I don't know why they have not chosen to make the commitment and investment of resources over and above what is the required least cost purchasing strategy.
So when you refer to expertise, don't ratepayers already, no matter who the provider is, they're paying for that expertise through base rates? So whether it's Columbia's expertise or Duke's expertise, ratepayers already pay for that expertise to provide that low-cost option, don't they?
Yes, I would agree with that. And we use our own in-house employees and resources to do that. Others may outsource or provide, look at other alternative procurement strategies. But I would agree with that.
So I think what this all boils down to is that there's a program in place that Columbia is benefiting to a great degree, very beneficially, especially in the transportation portion of this program. Because if you look at the off-system sales, which I agree, if you can buy gas cheaper and sell it for more, your customers definitely receive a great benefit from that. There's no question. And they also receive a benefit from buying gas at a lower price. But the transportation, while I agree provides a benefit, it's what incentive needs to be paid for a program that's already been in place for several years. And if we look at that transportation portion, and I think Ms. Goad was trying to refer to this as a percentage of total income, it's pretty substantial. So the question becomes, what incentive does Columbia really need in order for them to go, as you said, above and beyond the fair, just, and reasonable obligation? And is that $2.4 million, or is that $150,000, or what level is it that needs to be incentivized to reach that goal that you talk about? And the commission didn't eliminate the incentive, did they? They left an incentive in place, didn't they?
Not in the way the order was issued in October, because it changed the transportation cost index benchmark to the established discount rate. So that would mean that unless the renegotiation of the contract or some alternative procurement means for the demand cost was less than the $4.18, there's no incentive from that demand cost.
So why on the exhibit that Ms. Goad had up did it show transportation incentive benefit to Columbia of anywhere from $14,000 to $19,000 a month from October through, or not through October, through November through, I don't know, was it March?
Yes, so I'm separating the transportation cost index into kind of two pieces. One is the demand cost piece of the transportation contracts. The other piece that is also part of the TCI are capacity releases, and those dollars that you're seeing for um, uh, November 19 through March of 2020 for the transportation cost index would be the results of the capacity releases.
So there is still a transportation incentive, it's just not the benchmark tracker that you're arguing should be a portion of it.
The benchmark, it's still two pieces. So there's the comparison for the demand contracts to a benchmark for each contract, and the benchmark for the TICO contract was reestablished at the negotiated discounted rate. So unless that rate is able to be adjusted lower than the current discounted rate of $4.18, there is zero contribution to the transportation cost index from that component. The capacity releases are the second part of the transportation cost index, and so there is still a transportation cost index. I think that was your question, but the transportation cost index has two components, and one component at this point is producing zero value. The dollars that are shown on that Schedule 6 for November 19 through March of 2020 for the transportation cost column would be all coming from capacity release.
So, Ms. Goad, can you pull up that exhibit for me, please?
Brenda, could you please pull up the
There
exhibit?
we go.
Thank you.
That's the one. So here was the point I was trying to make. If you looked at the April through October, the company performance share is 3, 6, 9, 12, 14, 16, 19, over $2 million. But from November through March, it's only 65, 102, 127, about $160,000. And the point that I was trying to make is the company is still receiving an incentive payment. While it's not the substantial payments that were made prior to that, there's still an incentive that's being made to the benefit of Columbia, Kentucky. And so my question was, at what level of incentive does Columbia, Kentucky feel that it's beneficial to them to have the lowest cost procurement or system sales or transportation costs, considering that there's other companies that don't receive any incentive whatsoever?
Well, it's not my job to consider other, whether other utilities seek to have an incentive mechanism is an individual company decision, and not really part of my understanding about how they go about making their decisions. We all go about making our decisions for our least cost procurement strategies with the certainty of delivery capability for our peak days. We all have that as our baseline, and that's our obligation. The incentive, and yes, there is still a transportation cost incentive that currently under the commission's order is derived totally from capacity releases. but the transportation cost index, unlike gas cost and off-system sales, where those transactions are occurring on a much more frequent basis, they occur daily, monthly. The transportation contracts are entered into on a fixed term that is longer than just a year. Originally, those contracts, most LDCs had long-term contracts, and they were 20-year contracts. Nowadays, that term is generally in the industry, it's not generally a 20-year contract any longer, but once that contract is entered into, then you're competing against other changes that transpire. So for TICO and for Columbia, our understanding of the Commission's order from October 2019 that changed the transportation cost benchmark was that the Commission did not believe that Columbia had been aggressively pursuing discounts. Well, that $4.18 rate was a rate that was entered into in a long-term contract. But subsequent to that, as Ms. Goad was asking Mr. Anderson about, the additional charges have been added to the FERC authorized rate so that it has multiple components now. And one of those components is the CCRM that is additive to the otherwise base rate service from Columbia Gas Transmission. So the cost has gone up. Columbia aggressively, as Mr. Anderson was describing, negotiated and was able to secure for Columbia Gas of Kentucky the avoidance of that incremental component of the total FERC authorized rate. And our understanding of the Commission's order was that the Commission thought that the utility should be aggressively pursuing discounts. Columbia believes that its action in avoiding the CCRM and retaining this $4.18 rate in ongoing contract renewals and analysis it demonstrates that we have aggressively been pursuing those discounts to what is the FERC authorized rate. And so while it is on that basis that we sought rehearing. And that's why we asked for rehearing on the transportation cost index, because we had not explained or had the opportunity to share with the Commission the work that had been done to attain and retain and pursue the continuation of a discount on the demand cost that was below the FERC authorized rate. Understanding that the Commission, that understanding that the Commission didn't think we had aggressively been pursuing those discounts. We did offer an alternative in my testimony, and that's the reason that the comparison on page 10 of my testimony showed what the otherwise FERC authorized rate was in 2014 and compared that to the 2019 FERC authorized rate. So if, as an alternative, the incremental change over the years would be applied to the current FERC rate, or was determined from the current FERC rate versus the rate that was in effect in 2014 to come up with the percentage change over that 5-year period of time. And then our alternative calculation of the FERC benchmark would be not the discounted rate of $4.18, but a gross up for the percentage change since 2014 when that discount was negotiated. It's still my belief that the FERC authorized rate is the fair, just, and reasonable rate. That's what the FERC has determined. But we did provide this alternative in recognition that it is our obligation to, or the burden is on us to demonstrate to the Commission that we have been pursuing discounts and aggressively, in an aggressive manner, which the Commission established in or stated in that October 2019 order was the standard, a standard that we had not been notified of prior. We had no knowledge of that prior to the issuance of the order. I still think the FERC rate is the benchmark. But
Well, I'm just going to ask Ms. Goad
yes, sir.
to take down that exhibit, and we can discuss further here.
Okay.
So here's
I still can't see you, but
I think the issue that the Commission has is Columbia of Kentucky is stating that they entered into a long-term agreement to the benefit of ratepayers, and FERC has increased the rate, which is considered the fair, just, and reasonable rate in your opinion. And so therefore, there's this incremental change that keeps growing because you're not subject to the CCR, so the incremental difference continues to grow because you're still going from a baseline rate. If it was switched around and you didn't enter into a long-term contract and the transportation rate went up, would you not pass that along to ratepayers as a legitimate cost of doing business?
the FERC authorized rate, is that what you're saying? If we didn't have the
I'm referring to
discount?
your Kentucky transportation rate. If you had negotiated a rate that expired and the rate increased, would you not pass that along to ratepayers?
I want to make sure I'm understanding your question.
Here's the point I'm trying to make.
Yeah.
Your Columbia Gas has a minimal risk in this whole situation. They have the benefit of a long-term contract that goes into, I'm not sure when it expires, but whatever it is, over the period of time that it's been in effect, it's generating savings for Columbia Gas without really any new negotiation going on, no cost benefit done to determine whether it's the best or the worst, but it's generating savings because the FERC rate is increasing. That's already been excluded. So there's going to be an increase in savings going along because this rate that was put into effect. So there's no downside risk here, and there would be no downside risk no matter what, because if this rate was not in effect, at some point as the transportation costs went up, Columbia of Kentucky would pass those rates through in a rate increase to ratepayers, would they not?
If the rate were instead of $4.18, when the FERC approved rate is, I'm going to pull this $6.61 off of page 10.
Mm-hmm.
If we were negotiate, if we were able to negotiate a rate instead of $4.18, that was $4.80, then we would pass through the $4.80. The changes to the, but that is still a savings to customers off of the $6.60. But the risk that the commission's order and the modifications that it made would mean that the difference between $4.18 and $4.80 would become a cost to the company. We would pass through the $4.80,
Exactly.
but then we would have to, through the transportation cost adjustment, pay back the difference because we're being penalized for not meeting that $4.18 benchmark.
Okay, I understand the concern that Columbia Gas has, but that's why this has to be not a stagnant type calculation. It has to be dynamic. It has to reflect what's actually going on in the marketplace. So if the rate through the next contract were to go up, then the commission would have to take that into consideration as far as the savings go. In other words, not penalizing. That takes the risk out again. Either way, it's going to get passed through to ratepayers. Would you not agree?
Yes,
Okay. So
that would be my,
as I stated earlier, the commission, at least the three commissioners, are trying to look at all of the costs associated, no matter what the utilities are. These type of programs are the type, we looked at DSM programs on the electric side. These programs that provide an additional incentive for what the commission believes is the responsibility of the utility to do in the first place are going to be scrutinized heavily, which is what we're doing here with this program. I'm not saying that there's not a need for some kind of incentive, but we're definitely looking at what would be considered from the commission's perspective and for ratepayers to be a fair, just, and reasonable incentive that Columbia Gas still benefits and the ratepayers still benefit, and it proves out that it's a workable program. So that's what we're trying to do here in review of what has happened and why the rehearing was granted to get more information from Columbia, Kentucky. So that is where we are with it, okay?
okay.
I don't have any further questions. If you want to make a last comment, you can. And then I don't know if we're going to call Mr. Anderson back or not. We'll have to see.
Okay. I would like to make another comment, and that is, in that example that I gave, you know, if the rate, the FERC rate $6.61, if we were able to renegotiate a discount that's $4.80, I just picked that number, then there's still a savings to customers. If we weren't able to negotiate a discount at all, except for the Atmos and LG&E who have these incentives, and all of the other LDCs in Kentucky who are purchasing a least cost reliable procurement strategy that is our obligation for all of us. And if we were paying $6.61 for our capacity, then that's what would be passed through to the customers. I don't know if you could ever, why you would ever do this, but if you were to have a contract that said you were going to pay $6.70, you're paying over the FERC max rate. Then you've gone I would say then you're, as an LDC, you would not be meeting your obligation by paying an amount over the fair, just, and reasonable rate as determined by FERC. But any rate for a demand contract that is less than the FERC authorized rate is a savings to customers, no matter what that rate is. And if you would like us to go out and talk to other LDCs and encourage them to adopt our plan, and then they can, use their expertise to pursue strategies according to this incentive. That I know the commission has, in line with what, as you described, the changes made on demand side management and energy assistance programs. I know there's been some look for consistency, that consistency is what brought about the changes to Columbia's program in 2014.
So first, we're not going to encourage anybody to go out and put in an incentive program. At this point, I know from looking at all the gas pricing that Columbia is not the lowest price out there. And I would presume if they lost the CCR benefit, that they would go out for an RFP and actually look for an additional source because they lose that benefit. You need to plug in?
Yes, sorry.
Are you good?
Yes, sorry.
Okay.
I'm good. Yes, I'm good.
That's all I have. Ms. Wanchek, do you have a redirect?
I don't have a redirect at this time.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to go back to Ms. Goad to see if she has anything else.
No further questions for Ms. Cooper.
Did you want to call Mr. Anderson back?
If Mr. Anderson is easily available, then I could ask the few questions that Ms. Cooper deferred to him. If not, then I can always, we can issue those in the post-hearing data request. There he is.
What would you prefer?
I can go ahead and ask, since it appears he's available.
Let me ask if anybody else has questions for Ms. Cooper first. Mr. Bowker?
No, sir.
Mr. Penny?
I do not, Your Honor.
Dr. Matthews?
I do not.
Okay, so Ms. Cooper, you may be excused. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And could we have Mr. Anderson back? Is he still there?
I am here.
Thank you. Okay, you're still under oath, Mr. Anderson, and I think Ms. Goad has a couple of follow-up questions, and I think we can wrap this up after that.
Okay.
Ms. Goad?
Mr. Anderson, were you privy to Ms. Cooper and my conversation concerning her proposed alternative calculation?
Yes.
Okay. And she had alluded to the fact that you had provided her with some of the numbers that I was requesting. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
So can you tell me where you got the $4.831 number from? Was that the base SST tariff rate for 2014?
Yes, it was. If you go to, in the FERC docket, it's RP 14 0241-000. That is the base tariff rate for SST as of January 1st, 2014, and it's $4.831.
And where did you get the $6.612 number from? Was that the total FERC approved Columbia Gas Transmission SST rate for 2019?
I am searching for that, so just give me a second here.
Thank you.
So unfortunately, Columbia Transmission makes oftentimes multiple filings. I believe that was the rate at the time that we were developing the testimony. To put that into context, right now, the SST rate is 6.951.
But you would agree that the 6.612 number that you provided Ms. Cooper in her calculation, that is the total FERC-approved Columbia Gas Transmission SST rate for 2019 at that time.
At that point in time, yeah, there are a number of different rates that occur throughout the year. The latest that I have in my file right now is one that was made effective February 1st of 2019 in docket RP 19-00638-000. And that total effective rate at that point in time was $6.58. I believe there was one filed after that, which refers to the 661 rate you're referring to.
So the question that we have is, you used, for one number, you used the base SST tariff rate for 2014. And then for the second number, you used the total FERC-approved Columbia Gas Transmission SST rate for 2019. So we're a bit confused as to why, when you were creating this percentage increase for the alternative benchmark, why you didn't use the 2014 base SST rate and the 2019 SST rate, or use the 2014 total FERC approved rate and the 2019 total FERC approved rate. Do you see what I'm saying? It looks like we're mixing apples and oranges, and we're trying to figure out why that is.
Well, first of all, in the 19 rate, that includes the then current CCRM charges. It also includes additional surcharges that were added post 2014, a rate that's called the OTRA rate. And there are two other surcharges that are incorporated there, which would be the TICRET rate and the EPCA rate. So part of the reason is going to the initial base rate at 243.1 recognizes a start point that basically recognizes, one, that the negotiation for the original rate on TICO was in place prior to those two surcharges coming into effect, and then any subsequent changes that would have been a part of the TICR and EPCA rates. The EPCA is a electric cost adjustment that occurs on the TICO rates, and the TICR rate is an adjustment related to third-party transportation costs that the pipeline pays to provide service to its customers overall. So we looked at the base rate as being the starting rate first, and then the final rate, recognizing the fact that you had the OTRA and the CCRM rates added in there as well.
So do you believe it would be incorrect to use the base SST rate from 2014 to 2019, or the total FERC approved rate from 2014 to 2019, and just have apples to apples comparison? Do you think that would be an incorrect way of trying to get to an alternative benchmark calculation?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's incorrect because it, on the one side, incorporates OTRA, where on the other side it doesn't. On the one side, it would incorporate CCRM, where the other side it doesn't. I think to get to what you're getting to, if there was an adjustment, then, you know, base rate, TICRA and EPRA to start with, and then recognizing that the OTRA rates and the CCRM rates were in effect later on would be the final adjustment. So I know it's difficult to understand because of these changing charges that get input into the rates, but those are on the CCRM side particularly is related directly to those capital investments that Columbia Transmission has made over time. As I indicated earlier in testimony, when we went into modernization 2, there was a negotiation that adjusted base rates, but at the same time then rolled in the modernization 1 CCRM into base rates. So if there was an adjustment, then maybe what we would do is use that base rate coming out of 14, the 483.1, and then in the final rate back out the TICRA and EPA charges. Those two rates are about 30 cents, if I recall right. But,
Okay.
and they vary. They vary from filing to filing based upon, the prior year costs that Columbia Transmission has incurred.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Vice Chairman, the commission staff will be issuing a multitude of questions concerning these alternative benchmark calculations to Columbia. Thank you very much.
Is that it, Ms. Goode?
I have no further questions for Mr. Anderson.
Mr. Penny?
I've got nothing.
Mr. Bowker?
No, sir.
Dr. Matthews?
I don't have any.
Okay, I think that concludes Mr. Anderson's testimony. Ms. Wanchek, do you have any other witnesses?
I don't have any other at this time.
Do you have any questions for Mr. Anderson as a conclusion on a redirect, or are you satisfied?
I am satisfied, and we will just wait for the post-hearing data requests.
Okay, so there was I don't think anybody introduced any exhibits that were made a part of the record that probably wasn't already part of the record, so we don't have that issue.
Vice Chairman, I could ask for PSC's Exhibit 1 to be admitted into the record. Currently, it's part of Columbia's record in a separate case.
Okay.
We are going to ask them to file it into this case, but we can go ahead and ask for admission.
Okay, so go ahead and we'll mark it PSC Staff Exhibit 1.
Yes, please.
Okay, and I'll make sure that you provide a copy of that to the court recorder.
I have one.
You have one?
Thank you, yes, sir.
Got it already, thank you. Okay, so are there any motions at this time? All right, so we do have some requests for information. I think that's all in your court, Ms. Goode, is that correct? You're the only one requesting information?
Yes, commission staff would request until at least Monday, June 1st,
Okay,
to be able to compile all of the requests.
okay, and so do you think, Ms. Wanchek, you'll be able to respond by June 12th?
Without seeing them, I think it sounds reasonable.
Yeah, that's a Friday, so it's basically 2 weeks, 10 working days, 2 weeks. So if that's the case, we will put out our schedule that staff will provide by June 1st, all of the post-hearing data requests, and the response will be due on the 12th. Are you going to file a brief, or plan on filing a brief, Ms. Wanchek?
I would like to file a post-hearing brief. I think that perhaps maybe waiting to see what the outstanding questions that are going to be propounded upon us might be more appropriate to wait until after those are completed to file any sort of post-hearing brief.
Okay, so since your responses will be due by the 12th, if you plan on filing a brief, it's going to be due on the 24th. And I would ask that you provide Ms. Goad, once you have submitted your responses, whether you plan on filing that brief or not, so we have a heads up, okay?
Absolutely, Your Honor.
Okay, that being the case, I think we're all set. At this point, we're going to adjourn. Thank you very much, everyone. This meeting's adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a great day, buddy.